The crystal chandelier above the ballroom did not just glow. It felt like it was pressing down on Jennifer's shoulders. The light caught every tear on her face, making her pain a public show for the 200 guests who watched her. Just seconds ago, the man she loved had walked away. His words were still ringing in her ears like a physical blow. He had called her too much. He had told the room he could no longer pretend to love a woman who looked like her. Jennifer stood in the center of the marble floor, her arms hanging helplessly at her sides. The white satin of her dress, which had felt like a dream that morning, now felt like a shroud. She could hear the whispers starting sharp, cold sounds that cut through her quiet dignity. People were covering their mouths, their eyes darting over her body with pity and judgment. She wanted the floor to open up. She wanted to disappear into the shadows where no one could see the bride who wasn't wanted. Then, the heavy doors at the back of the room creaked. The whispers died instantly. A man walked through the crowd, and the air seemed to move with him. He was tall, dressed in a black tuxedo that looked like it was made of shadows and precision. This was Yuji Itadori. Even Jennifer, lost in her grief, knew that name. He was a man of dangerous power and silent command. He didn't look at the shocked guests or the angry parents. His intense, dark eyes were fixed entirely on Jennifer. He stopped just a few feet from her. His face was a mask of disciplined calm, but there was a flicker of something human behind his gaze, a recognition of her pain. While everyone else looked away or stared in mockery, Yuji looked at her like she was the only person in the room who mattered. Slowly, with a grace that felt like a promise, he extended his hand toward her. His palm was open, steady, and certain. "The man who left you was a fool who didn't know what he had," Yuji said. His voice was low, but it filled the silent ballroom. "But I know, Jennifer Okoro, don't cry for a coward. Walk out of here with me instead." Jennifer stared at the hand Yuji offered her. Her heart was beating so hard she felt it in her throat. Around them, the guests were frozen like statues. No one dared to breathe. For months, everyone had told her to hide and to be smaller. But here was a man who saw her clearly in the middle of her greatest mess, and he was not asking her to hide. He was asking her to stand up. She reached out and placed her hand in his. His skin was warm and his grip was firm. It felt like grabbing onto a solid rock in the middle of a stormy sea. As soon as their fingers touched, Jennifer felt a tiny spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of safety. Yuji did not pull her or rush her. He waited for her to find her balance, his dark eyes never leaving her face. "Head up, Jennifer," he whispered. It wasn't a suggestion, it was an order. She took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. The white satin of her dress rustled as she moved. The fabric was stained with her tears, and the flowers she had spent hours choosing were scattered on the floor like trash. But as she turned away from the altar, she didn't look back at the man who had broken his promise. She looked forward at the path Yuji was clearing for her. They began to walk. The guests parted like water before a ship. The same people who had been whispering cruel things just moments ago now stepped back in fear. They knew who Yuji Itadori was. They knew that being near him was dangerous, but being his enemy was worse. Jennifer could feel their eyes on her, but the weight felt different now. It wasn't the weight of shame anymore. It was the weight of a new, strange power. As they reached the tall, heavy doors of the ballroom, Jennifer saw her ex-fiancé standing near the exit. He looked pale and small. For a second, their eyes met. He looked at her with a mix of shock and regret, but Jennifer didn't stop. She didn't say a word. She simply tightened her hold on Yuji's arm. They stepped out into the cool night air. The city lights were bright, and a long black car was waiting at the curb. The driver held the door open, bowing low as they approached. Jennifer looked down at the white dress that was now a ruin of her old life. She realized that she wasn't just leaving a wedding. She was leaving behind the version of herself that believed she wasn't good enough. Yuji helped her into the back of the car. As the door closed, the sounds of the ballroom and the judgment of the crowd disappeared into total silence. She was in the dark now, sitting beside a man the whole city feared. But for the first time in her life, Jennifer Okoro felt like she could finally breathe. The car ride was silent, but it was not the heavy silence of the ballroom. It was the quiet of a deep forest. Jennifer watched the city lights blur through the tinted windows, her hand still resting on the seat where Yuji's fingers had been. When the car finally slowed down, they were in front of a gate that looked like it was made of iron lace. It opened slowly, revealing a long driveway lined with trees that stood like tall guards. At the end of the path sat the house. It was a massive building made of dark stone, glass, and steel. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a fortress. Large windows reached from the ground to the roof, reflecting the moon like cold mirrors. Everything about the place felt expensive and strong. It was beautiful, but it was a beauty that didn't seem to care if anyone liked it or not. Yuji stepped out and offered his hand again. He led Jennifer through the front doors into a hallway that felt as big as a cathedral. The floors were polished marble that hummed under her feet, and the air smelled like expensive wood and rain. There were no bright colors here. Everything was black, white, and silver. It was a world of quiet luxury, where the wealth was so great it didn't need to shout. "This is where you will stay," Yuji said. His voice echoed slightly against the high ceilings. "No one can enter this house without my permission. Here, you are safe." Jennifer walked deeper into the house, her wedding dress trailing behind her like a ghost. She passed rooms filled with art she didn't understand, and furniture that looked too perfect to sit on. Every surface was clean and cold. She looked at her reflection in a wall made of dark glass. She saw a woman in a ruined white dress, her eyes still red from crying, standing in the middle of a palace. She realized then that this house was a perfect reflection of the man beside her. It was strong, it was rich, and it was lonely. There were no photos on the walls and no mess on the tables. It was a place where everything was in its right spot, but nothing seemed to be alive. As Yuji showed her to a large bedroom filled with soft gray blankets and a window that looked out over the sleeping city, Jennifer felt a strange shiver. The house was a sanctuary, a place where the cruel whispers of the ballroom could never reach her. But as she heard the heavy click of the door closing behind her, she wondered if she had truly escaped. The walls were thick, and the glass was strong. It was the most beautiful place she had ever seen, but it felt like a cage made of silver. She was no longer a victim, but she wasn't sure yet if she was free. Jennifer did not sleep well that first night. The gray blankets were soft, but the room was too quiet. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her ex-fiancé's face and heard the mean things he had said about her weight. She felt like a broken thing that had been hidden away in an expensive box. The next morning, she wandered down the wide stairs. She found Yuji in a room filled with books. He was standing by a window, looking out at the gardens. He was not wearing his tuxedo anymore. He wore a simple black sweater, but he still looked just as powerful. When he heard her footsteps, he turned around. The sunlight hit his face, and Jennifer noticed a look in his eyes she hadn't seen before. It was a mix of sadness and deep interest. "You look tired, Jennifer," he said softly. "It is hard to feel at home in a place so perfect," she replied, looking down at her hands. "I keep waiting for someone to tell me I don't belong here. That is what I am used to." Yuji walked closer until he was standing just a few feet away. "I have been watching you for a long time," he admitted. Jennifer looked up, shocked. "Not just last night. I saw you at the park 3 months ago. I saw you at the charity dinner in January. I watched the way people treated you, and I watched the way you handled it." Jennifer felt a flush of heat on her cheeks. "Why would a man like you watch someone like me?" "Because the world is full of people who are fake," Yuji said, his voice getting a bit darker. "My life is full of people who smile while they hide a knife. But you are real. I saw you standing in rooms where people were being cruel, and you never lost your kindness. You stayed strong even when you were hurting. It made me angry to see them try to make you feel small." He looked away for a moment, and Jennifer saw the conflict in his face. He looked like a man who wanted to be kind but had spent his whole life being tough. "I didn't bring you here just to save you," he whispered, looking back at her. "I brought you here because I wanted to be near someone who still has a soul. In my world, everyone is a ghost. You are the only thing that feels alive." Jennifer stood still, her heart racing. For years, she had felt invisible or judged. She had never imagined that while she was feeling lonely, the most dangerous man in the city was watching her with respect. The house still felt cold, but as she looked at Yuji, she realized the bars of this beautiful prison were starting to feel a little less like a cage. A few days later, the sun was setting, painting the high walls of the dining room in shades of orange and gold. Jennifer walked into the room, expecting to find a small salad or a plate of steamed vegetables. That was what she was used to. For years, every meal had felt like a test she was failing. Bryce had always watched her plate, his eyes counting every bite she took until the food tasted like shame. But when she reached the long, dark wood table, her breath caught. It was covered in a feast. There were roasted meats, warm bread with herb butter, bowls of creamy pasta, and colorful fruits. The air smelled wonderful, like garlic and rosemary. It was the kind of meal she usually avoided because she was afraid of being judged. Yuji was already sitting at the head of the table. He didn't look at her with a scale in his eyes. He simply pulled out a chair for her. "Eat, Jennifer," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Is this all for us?" she asked, her voice small. "It is so much. My ex-fiancé used to say that I should be careful. He left gym schedules on my pillow. He made me feel like I had to earn my right to eat." Yuji's expression darkened for a split second, a flash of anger crossing his handsome face. He set his fork down and looked directly at her. "In this house, we do not count. We do not shrink. I did not bring you here to watch you disappear. I brought you here because you are a woman of substance, and I want you to stay that way." He reached across the table and placed a large serving of pasta on her plate. Then he added a piece of the warm bread. "The world is full of people who think being beautiful means being nearly invisible. They are wrong. Strength needs fuel. I want you to enjoy this because you deserve to take up space." Jennifer took a tentative bite of the bread. It was soft and rich. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the urge to apologize for being hungry. She looked at Yuji, and he wasn't checking her waistline or frowning at her plate. He was simply eating with her, sharing a quiet moment in a vast, cold world. As she ate, the tightness in her chest began to loosen. The food wasn't just fuel, it was a message. Yuji was celebrating her presence exactly as she was. Under the glow of the silver chandeliers, the meal became a turning point. She wasn't a problem to be solved anymore. She was a woman being honored. And for the first time, the food didn't taste like guilt. It tasted like freedom. The calm of the estate was broken a week later when Yuji had to host a meeting in the Grand Library. Jennifer was walking down the hallway when she heard voices rising from behind the heavy oak doors. Usually, the house felt like a tomb, but now it was filled with the rough, loud sounds of men who were used to getting their way. She stepped into the room to return a book she had finished, but she stopped when she saw 3 men standing around Yuji's desk. They were large and dressed in dark suits, their faces scarred and tired. They were Yuji's top subordinates, and they did not look happy. One of them, a man with a jagged line across his cheek, was pointing at a map and shouting. When Jennifer entered, the room went silent. The men turned to look at her, and she felt the old, familiar heat of judgment. Their eyes moved over her wedding dress, which she had replaced with a simple but elegant black gown, and then over her body. The man with the scar smirked, a look of pure disrespect on his face. "Is this what we are protecting now, boss?" the man asked, his voice dripping with mean laughter. "We have work to do, and you are wasting time with a girl who looks like she belongs in a bakery, not a boardroom." Jennifer felt her heart hammer against her ribs. For a second, she wanted to shrink. She wanted to turn around and run back to her gray bedroom. But then, she caught Yuji's eye. He wasn't moving to defend her. He was watching her, his dark eyes waiting to see what she would do. He had told her she was a woman of substance. He had told her she deserved to take up space. Jennifer didn't run. Instead, she took a step forward, her head held high. She didn't scream, but she made sure her voice was as cold and sharp as the steel in the room. "You are standing in a house that is not yours," Jennifer said, her voice steady and clear. "And you are speaking to a woman you do not know. If you think my size makes me soft, you are as foolish as the man who left me at the altar." My husband is the boss, but I am the one who keeps this house. If you cannot show respect, you can find the door." The subordinates blinked in shock. They looked at each other, then back at the woman who was standing her ground. The man with the scar slowly lowered his hand, his smirk disappearing. Yuji finally leaned back in his chair, a small, proud smile touching his lips. "You heard her," Yuji said quietly. "Apologize to my wife or leave." The men muttered their apologies, their heads bowed. Jennifer didn't wait for them to finish. She placed her book on the shelf and walked out with a grace that felt like iron. She had finally found her voice, and it sounded like a queen's. The house was darker than usual that night. A cold rain tapped against the glass walls, making the steel frame of the mansion groan in the wind. Jennifer walked toward the library to find a new book, but she stopped when she saw a light glowing from under the door of Yuji's private study. Usually, that door was locked tight. It was the one place in the house where his disciplined calm was absolute. She pushed the door open just an inch. The room smelled of old paper and bitter tea. Yuji was sitting in a chair by the fire, but he wasn't reading. His head was in his hands, and his broad shoulders, usually so firm and dominant, were slumped. He looked smaller, as if the weight of the city was finally pressing him into the floor. "Yuji?" she whispered. He jumped slightly, his dark eyes snapping open. For a second, the mask of the Mafia boss tried to slide back into place, but it was too late. Jennifer saw the emotional tension break. His hands were shaking just a little bit. On the desk next to him sat a small, crumpled photograph of a woman who looked just like him, his sister, the one the world had taken away. "I am fine, Jennifer," he said, but his voice cracked. It was the sound of a man who had been holding his breath for 3 years. Jennifer didn't stay by the door. She walked across the soft carpet and sat on the floor near his chair. She didn't ask him to be strong. She didn't ask him to lead. She simply reached up and placed her hand over his shaking fingers. The man who had protected her from the whispers of the ballroom now looked like he needed a sanctuary of his own. "You don't have to be a fortress tonight," she said softly. "The walls of this house are thick enough to hold your pain. Let me be the one to watch the door for a while." Yuji leaned back, a long, shaky breath escaping his lips. He didn't pull away. Instead, he gripped her hand like it was the only thing keeping him from drifting away. He told her about the guilt that lived in the shadow's scar on his heart. He talked about the sister he couldn't save and the cold life he had built to keep from feeling anything else. As the fire burned low, the roles shifted. Jennifer, the woman who had been wounded in front of everyone, was now the one providing the shadow's protection. She listened without judgment. She held his hand until the shaking stopped. In the quiet of the night, she realized that Yuji wasn't just a dangerous man. He was a lonely one. She was no longer just his wife or a woman he saved. She was the keeper of his secret heart. Under the dark sky, she became the fortress he needed. The invitation sat on the marble counter like a challenge. It was for the city's biggest gala, the same event where Jennifer's ex-fiancé and all the people who had laughed at her would be gathered. In the past, Jennifer would have tried to find a way to stay home. She would have looked for a dress that was loose and dark, something to make her blend into the shadows. But as she looked at Yuji across the breakfast table, she knew those days were over. "They are expecting you to hide," Yuji said, his voice like velvet. "They think you are still the broken girl from the altar. Show them they are wrong." A famous stylist arrived at the mansion that afternoon with racks of expensive clothes. She started pulling out dresses that were designed to cover Jennifer up heavy fabrics and high necklines, but Jennifer pushed them aside. She walked to the back of the rack and found a gown that made the stylist gasp. It was a deep, shimmering emerald green. The fabric was silk that felt like water, and the design was bold. It had a fitted waist and a neckline that showed her shoulders and the curve of her neck. "This one," Jennifer said, her voice firm. "But ma'am," the stylist whispered, "this dress is very bright. It will draw everyone's eyes to you. It doesn't hide anything." "Good," Jennifer replied, looking at her reflection. "I am tired of hiding. I want them to see every bit of me." As the night of the gala arrived, the mansion was filled with a quiet energy. Jennifer spent hours getting ready. She didn't let the makeup artist paint over her natural glow. She wore her hair in thick, beautiful curls that bounced when she moved. She put on the dangling emerald earrings Yuji had given her, which caught the light every time she turned her head. When she finally walked down the grand stairs, Yuji was waiting at the bottom. He was in his usual black tuxedo, looking sharp and dangerous. When he saw her, he didn't say a word at first. He simply breathed in, his dark eyes roaming over the emerald silk and the way it honored her body. For a moment, the disciplined calm on his face broke into pure admiration. "You look like a queen heading to her throne," he said softly, offering his arm. Jennifer took it, her shoulders square and her chin level. She wasn't the plus-size problem anymore. She was a woman who was about to walk into a room full of wolves, and for the first time, she wasn't afraid of the bite. She was ready to be seen. Together, they stepped into the cool night air, leaving the sanctuary of the mansion behind to face the world. The ballroom doors swung open, and the noise of 100 conversations died down as Jennifer and Yuji walked in. The room was a sea of black and gold, filled with the same people who had watched Jennifer's heart break only months ago. She felt Yuji's arm beneath her hand, solid and steady. The emerald silk of her dress rustled with every step, and she did not look at the floor. She looked straight ahead. It didn't take long to find him. Bryce was standing near the center of the room, a glass of champagne in his hand. He was talking to a group of men, laughing at some joke, until he turned and saw her. The glass in his hand tilted dangerously. His mouth fell open, and his eyes darted from the expensive emerald jewels on Jennifer's ears to the powerful man standing at her side. "Jennifer?" Bryce stammered as they approached. He looked her up and down, searching for the broken girl he had discarded. You look different." Jennifer stopped. She didn't feel the old urge to pull at her dress or hide her face. She looked at Bryce, really looked at him. She saw the way his suit didn't quite fit his narrow shoulders. She saw the nervous way he glanced at the crowd, worried about what they thought. For years, she had thought he was a giant whose opinion was the only thing that mattered. Now, standing next to Yuji, Bryce looked like a small, frightened boy. "I am not different, Bryce," Jennifer said, her voice like smooth stone. "I am just no longer looking at myself through your eyes. I am seeing myself through my own." Bryce stepped closer, his voice a low whisper. "I heard about the wedding. I thought you would be hiding. I thought you would be ashamed." Yuji moved just half a step forward. He didn't say a word, but the lethal calm in his eyes made Bryce stumble back. Jennifer placed a gentle hand on Yuji's arm to let him know she had this handled. She leaned in toward Bryce, her emerald earrings swaying. "You left me because you thought I was too much space to hold," she said softly, so only he could hear. "But you were just too small to hold me. Look around, Bryce. Everyone is staring, but they aren't laughing at me. They are wondering how a man like you could be so blind." She didn't wait for him to answer. She didn't need to hear his excuses or his regret. The mirror's revenge wasn't about hurting him. It was about the fact that he no longer had the power to hurt her. She turned away, her long green train sweeping over the floor, and walked deeper into the room with Yuji. She was magnificent, and as she caught her reflection in the tall mirrors of the ballroom, she finally believed it. The gala was over, and the heavy doors of the mansion closed behind them, shutting out the world once more. But as Jennifer stepped into the grand hallway, she didn't feel like she was returning to a prison. The quiet luxury of the marble and steel no longer felt cold. The house had changed because she had changed. She reached up and unclipped the heavy emerald earrings, feeling the weight lift from her ears, but her heart stayed light. Yuji watched her from the shadows of the hallway. He pulled off his black bow tie and unbuttoned the collar of his shirt, letting his disciplined calm fall away. In the dim light, he didn't look like a feared Mafia boss. He looked like a man who had finally found a place to rest. He walked toward her, his footsteps soft on the stone floor. "You don't have to wear the satin or the jewels anymore, Jennifer," he said. His voice was thick with emotion. "The show is over. You proved to everyone that you are more powerful than their words. But I want to know what you want now. The 2 years I promised are just a number. You are free to go, or you can stay." Jennifer turned to him. She looked at his face, the conflicted lines around his eyes, and the shadow's scar on his heart. For a long time, she had lived her life for other people. She had tried to be small for Bryce and tried to be brave for the crowd. But standing here with Yuji, she realized she didn't have to be anything but herself. "I spent my whole life being told I was too much," Jennifer whispered. "And you spent your life being told you were too dangerous. We both lived in the dark because we were afraid of being judged." She took a step closer, placing her hand on his chest. She could feel his heart beating, steady and strong. "I don't want to leave. I want to build a life where we don't have to hide behind tuxedos and satin. I want to be in a place where we are both seen and finally safe." Yuji leaned down, resting his forehead against hers. A long, peaceful breath escaped him. It was a choice they were making together, not an arrangement made out of pity or need, but a real connection between two souls that had found each other in the wreckage. "Then we stay," Yuji promised. Outside, the first light of a new day began to peek over the city. Inside the fortress of glass and steel, Jennifer Okoro was finally home. She wasn't shrinking, and she wasn't hiding. She was a woman who was loved exactly as she was, and as they walked up the stairs together, the shadows finally disappeared.